Welcome back to the Enlightened Misfits podcast. I am your host, Lauren, and in today's episode, I have Nathan. He is a hypnotherapist and leadership coach. Welcome, Nathan. So happy to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you, Lauren, for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So, kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and then a little bit about your journey and where you are today.
Crikey, how long have we got to kind of go put all that into one box? So, primarily I'm a hypnotherapist. So I spend probably 80-90% of my time working one-to-one with people, working on self-sabotage, working on people-pleasing, perfectionism, procrastination, all those wonderful things. But also I'm a leadership coach. So I've spent the last 5 years in hypnotherapy. I spent the last 16 years working as leadership coach, working inside FTSE 250 organizations, corporate spaces. But then before that, it was very much me learning lots of lessons the hard way and starting to understand kind of physically and emotionally why we do what we do, but not really having the foundations and the connective tissue between those experiences that I've now have, which enables me to help other people. So the biggest things that have happened in my life, I was diagnosed with an incurable autoimmune disorder when I was 8 years old. I'm now 47, so that was quite some time ago. I experienced horrendous bullying at school. I became a bully because I didn't know what to do with it. I got into drugs in order to self-medicate and shut down my mind and my feelings. I've traveled the world. I managed the customer services for Time and Fortune magazine and National Geographic while I lived in Amsterdam for 4 years as well. So not only have I done kind of or had these kind of quite tough experiences, I've also had some great experiences as well. Traveled the world, studied martial arts in Brazil, and also overdosed on recreational drugs when I was 23. I took 16 ecstasy tablets in one sitting and over 5 grams of cocaine. And was lucky to come out the other side of that. So there's been this constant to and fro, this like highs and lows, extremes of the human experience to a certain extent, which have helped to give me an understanding of why we do what we do as humans. And through my lived experiences and struggling inside the corporate space, struggling inside the 9 to 5 psychologically, workplace anxiety, just not feeling like I was fitting in, always feeling like the black sheep, always feeling like I was a square peg in a round hole and wondering why I was the problem. When actually what I learned later on in life, more so these days, is like 98% of the world is actually thinking, why am I the problem? And not connecting those dots together and understanding that actually everybody feels like this. Everyone feels disorientated, discombobulated, and is still trying to find themselves amongst the noise and amongst the frustrations and amongst the experiences and the traumas that they've had. So now where I am, because of the life story, because of all the little bits and bobs, and by the way, I cured the incurable autoimmune disorder, so that's gone as well. So through these life experiences and wrapping it up in leadership psychology and psychotherapy frameworks and understanding why we do what we do, using the hypnotherapy, I'm able to take people into really deep, profound states of relaxation where they can have a conversation with themselves, which they've been waiting for someone else to have, where they've been looking outside of themselves for solutions, and helping them to realize that what they're looking for is actually inside of themselves all along. And the person that is going to rescue them is going to be them. And helping people just to reconcile all those previous wounds that have been kind of causing them all sorts of problems and showing up in the world. So this is what I do for people.
Yeah, I love that. Can you kind of talk a little bit about, I feel like this was me too, why people are the way they are. First, I wanted to figure out why my life was the way it was, when I first started. But why people are, like, when you say, why people, what I should just say, why humans do what humans do. Can you kind of elaborate on that? Like, what does that mean? And like, what are some of the things that you have experienced? Well, I should say you have learned through your experiences.
100%. The key thing that we need as human beings is connection. That's it, hands down. That's kind of the prerequisite for human survival is actual physical, emotional connection. But then what happens, why we do what we do, is because of the things that we did and didn't get as children. And it doesn't matter what we're looking at or to what scale, whether it's leading governments, leading organizations, inside the family, situations, relationships, it's all because of the things we did and didn't get as children. Because I think it was Dr. Sandra Wilson said, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
So when we don't know what to do with our hurt and our pain, we'll then go and give that to other people because we think that's what we need to do. We'll do unto others as was done unto us in order to make ourselves feel better, to validate the things that happened, to kind of give them some sort of credibility or credence that it was okay that those things happened while actually damaging somebody else. So these experiences that we have, the way that I explain it to people is like this. Like I use this story every time. It's like, if you imagine there's a little version of you, right? And you're in the boardroom of your head and you're maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, but you're all dressed up in adult clothes, you know, with all the sleeves hanging down, looking like one of those cute wedding card pictures. Do you know the ones I mean, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's mum and dad, and it's normally mum and dad, and God love them. Like, you know, our parents did the best they could with the best they had and all those things. And people that I work with, the parents are on a sliding scale. Most of them are unconscious, unaware, all the way up to willfully and socially abusive and should never have had children. Okay. So I work with a mixture of people. But what happens is you've got mum and dad, and they're the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and they're gods, right? And they have to be, right? Because human babies are the most useless creature on the planet. If you look at a cat or a dog or a buffalo, right, within 2 hours they can walk, within 2 days they can run. Human baby can't even wipe its own backside for the first 4 years of its life, if you're lucky, right? So
Right.
mum and dad have got to be gods. Now, the only thing that you need as a child and as an adult, you need 3 things: to feel safe, certain, and loved. That's it. Safe with these people, certain that you're going to get your needs met, and loved for who you are. That's it. But then something happens, right? Your mum says something or your dad does something, whatever it is, and you get given this dossier of how messed up your parents are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, no matter how much you love them or whatever, there'll be a moment where that happens.
Yeah.
But this dossier is actually trauma. And trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you, as Gabor Mate says, okay? Something that changes you psychologically and physiologically in order to survive. But in this moment, you get given this dossier, and there is no big or small trauma. There is surviving the 80-car pileup on the freeway or on the highway or whatever. But there's also the last words your first girlfriend or boyfriend said to you when you were 12 years old. That could be traumatic, okay?
Yeah.
So in this moment, you get this given this dossier, and if you open this dossier, you're cooked. It's done. Like, you no longer feel safe, you no longer feel certain, you no longer feel loved. And in that moment, because up until the age of 7, if you don't feel safe and certain, you can die from that. If you don't get food, shelter, clothing, loving warmth, etc., you can die from this psychologically and physiologically.
Mm-hmm.
So the human brain only wants you to do 2 things: stay alive, make babies. That's it. That's what the human brain wants you to do. It's kind of simple. That's how the human species gets to continue on, like, doing what we're doing. Okay.
Right.
Right. But in that moment, there's a few things that we require complete safety and certainty to do. And one of those is physical intimacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in those moments, like, it thinks in that moment where there's that disconnect, where there's that trauma, where there's that pain, you don't feel safe, you don't feel certain, your ego actually thinks you're going to die. Doesn't matter how severe it is, doesn't matter whatever. In that split second, there's a disconnect, and your ego's like, you're going to die. And this is when your ego starts to form and steps in. And your ego rocks up and it says, I'll take that away from you. And the little version of you, 3, 4 years old, is like, seriously, bro, I'm good. Take it. I don't want to feel like this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the ego's like, great. And it reaches in, it takes the dossier and it takes the emotional heat out of it and it takes the memories out of it. And sometimes that's why we have sketchy memories as kids. We don't remember bits and bobs because actually some of them were too painful, just in split seconds. Not maybe our parents were great, but maybe in those moments it was a bit, painful, too much for us to bear.
Yeah.
And then your ego goes, right, I'm going to mark this room a 99 out of 100 for shitstorm. Okay. If you go in here, it's going to be apocalyptic. It's going to be 4 horsemen. It's going to be rivers of blood. It's going to be cats liking dogs. It's going to be a mess. Right. And the little you's like, seriously, bro, I'm good. Take it away. And like, ego's like, great.
Right.
So
Right.
the ego locks it away. It hides all that memory from you, so that you can carry on moving forward in the world, because you can't exist in a world feeling like you're going to constantly die. That just doesn't work.
Right.
So in that moment, what it says, but in order for you to stay away from the room, you're going to have to change the way you behave. And the little versions of you, well, I don't want to feel like that. What do you want me to do? And sometimes for some people, this can be the hardest thing for people to hear, is because the ego says, in order for you to stay away from that room, you're going to have to say it's all your fault.
Mm.
Because if it's not your fault, it's their fault. And if it's their fault, you won't feel safe and certain with them.
Mm.
But what you're actually saying is you're not lovable. Because if you were lovable, they wouldn't have done that to you. So the little version of you, in that split second, it's less than 0.2 of a second, we make that decision. Bam. And we're now using that as the blueprint, the foundation for how we're going to live the rest of our life. So the ego says, well, you can't live your whole life feeling like you're empty and you've got this hole inside of you that you're not lovable. You're going to have to go out there and bridge this gap. So why don't you try a little bit of people pleasing?
Mm.
Why don't you try some perfectionism? What about a little bit of procrastination? That's really helpful. The 3 big P's, we can get those out there. What about a little bit of addiction?
Right.
What about, maybe what about your eating habits? What about your relationship dynamics? Maybe you can keep getting in the same relationship with a different person. How would that work for you? And you start to see these repetitions in people's lives, mine included, like repetitions in life, the addiction, the overworking, the socially accepted addictions, like drinking too much coffee or whatever it might be. And then we start to see these habits and behaviors, but then they start to come out in 2 ways: illness or incident.
Mm-hmm.
You'll start to see a repetition of relationship dynamics, certain abuse dynamics starting to come out. Or you'll see things like autoimmune dysregulation, which actually have a foundation in trauma and trauma psychology. So when we start to see these things, it's like a really good kind of indication that something is going on in the psyche. So when we see this, it's like, this is why the ego does what it does. But the ego is doing all of this because it doesn't want you to feel like you did when it first showed up in your life. It's doing all of this. It's getting you into these repeated moments, these behaviors, these addictions, these habits, because it loves you. It loves you so much. It doesn't want you to feel like you did in that moment when mum shouted at you for drawing on the wallpaper, or your parents got divorced, or someone in your family died, or whatever. It doesn't want you to feel like that because it thinks if you feel like that, you will die. So it gives you a drug addiction. So it gives you overworking. So it changes your relationship. You don't get so close to your kids in case you get too close to them and you learn to love them too much and something happens, so that you don't repeat the things that happened to you as a child. So we start to see these habits and behaviors because all these habits and behaviors have some sort of beneficial outcome according to your ego, whether or not it's slowly destroying you. And this is why we do what we do.
I love that. I'm going through when I'm here, I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, wow, it just makes, I mean, like, I know, I started out hating my ego. I'm like, I don't want my ego. I don't like, and I feel like that's a process of learning how to deal with your ego, having an ego death and all that stuff. And it's like, one thing I heard last night on this call that I was on, it was like your ego can't have the upper hand. You have to be able to control your ego.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, wow, I can see my life like when you were like, walking through different things. I'm like, I could see that to be my life, of like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. There's things, when I didn't listen to like my ego, or it's like, I could have died,
Yep.
like, so it's like, it makes sense. And I feel like a lot of people, one thing particular, me personally, when I started to heal, um, getting out of codependent relationships, getting out of like, I feel like my drug of choice was relationships. Not that it's compared to a physical drug, but at the same time, it does the same thing to our body, right? So it's like,
Yep.
I'm not saying, when I say that, I always like, I don't want to trigger people saying like, oh, I just experienced it in my life, this lifetime differently, that other people have. And I noticed that I stopped blaming other people. It wasn't my parents' fault. I was always in that victim mentality of like poor me. And now it's, somebody has said to me, gosh, you're so self-aware. And I'm like, well, why? It's like, shouldn't I be this way? Like, like, but it's like, oh, because normal humans, like the normal, general population of humans are not self aware, are not going to sit there and be like, yeah, I can look at self sabotage, or I'm doom scrolling, or I feel like I'm in freeze or fawn or something like that, and be like, yeah, that's me, calling myself out of like, I know what I'm doing. Sometimes I feel like we do need to disassociate sometimes and just kind of process things, but to a level of like, is this hurting you? Or are you telling me you want to make money in your business? Right. And it's like, what are you doing?
Yep.
You kind of have to be calling yourself out, or self discipline, or maybe you just need to give yourself compassion. And I often
Correct.
related all of this of like, somebody else needs to do this for me. I could look at men and say they're broken and I can fix them. Meanwhile, I'm so broken and I'm so unlovable that how am I going to do that to them? Which I do have to say, a lot of women that I've worked with, me included, and I'm sure you can probably attest to this, is I never left somebody more broken than I met them. So it's like, sure, I was hurt and I was probably hurting people subconsciously. I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I looked back at every relationship that I've been in and they've had a lot of trauma. And I thought to myself, oh, I took that personal and it had nothing to do with me. And it was really like enlightening for me to learn that, because I realized somebody else's shit has nothing to do with you. And us humans, to this day, I still sometimes take things personal. And it's like, it's nothing to do with you. So like, I feel like I don't know why I need to say that, but I feel like from what you said, I feel like a lot of us humans take stuff so personal, and we all just have our own shit going on. So
Yeah. So there's two things I want to to riff off of that. The first thing is the difference between responding and reacting.
yeah,
So when we talk about this, and a lot of people have Sadhguru and a few other people that talked about responsibility. And so what is a responsibility? It's your ability to respond. That's a responsibility.
yeah,
But what many people, and I realized a couple of years ago, is when we look at when we're reacting, what are we actually doing? We are reacting a past moment in the present, which is stopping us from creating the future.
right,
So then in this moment, we end up in a relationship dynamic, and you become a character in my story. I become a character in your story, and we have no idea we're doing it to each other consciously.
yeah,
But what you're actually doing is you've got a little checklist in your head, and you're waiting for me to screw up. You're waiting for me to say the wrong thing. You're waiting for me to text an ex. You're waiting for me to say whatever it was or behave in a certain, just so you can say, I told you so. They're not good enough to be with you. So you're that egoic part of you is on high alert, constantly watching these things, but your language changes in order to actually encourage me to say these things. And you don't even realize you're doing it. It's like you've got your script out and you're encouraging me to read off my script to remind me of my lines. So until one of us actually steps out and goes, hold on a minute, what's going on here?
yeah,
How do I change the dynamics here? Right now, I feel like we're having a conversation and I feel like a 7-year-old wrapped up in a 47-year-old's body. What's going on?
yeah,
Because we're playing these characters, the characters that we learned to play or we saw play out in our parents when we were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and we're watching them divorce or having arguments or whatever they were doing.
yeah,
We're just repeating those things in different ways. How we were treated by a teacher, we're then regurgitating that into our relationships with our children, so on and so forth. But that's how we've learned to survive. We couldn't be X, we couldn't be something, we couldn't be the strong one, the whatever one, so we had to be Y, we had to be something else in order to prove that we were good enough to be there. But
yeah,
that foundation is already screwed because it's built on the fact that we weren't good enough in the first place. So we end up acting and playing this character in order to maintain some sort of connection and some sort of relationship.
right,
But then we just keep going around and around. That's why we end up in the same relationship with a different person, and so on and so forth.
yeah,
But at the same time, the sneaky bit of it is your ego is running the show. but your ego doesn't want it to know it's there. So it creates the habits and the behaviors. It's like the Wizard of Oz. It's like the wizard, when at the end of the Wizard of Oz and the little old man's behind the curtain and you've got the big green head there. The ego doesn't want you to know it's a little old man behind the curtain pulling some levers, right?
Right.
But at the same time, your ego still thinks you're 4 years old. So it's doing everything it can to look after the 4-year-old. So then what happens is, you go, right, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to be a better human being. I'm going to be a nicer husband and a better father. And I'm going to stop taking drugs and da-da-da-da. And then something happens and we end up going out on a night out or we have a drink or we do something that we say we're not going to do. And the first thing that we'll often do as human beings is we'll then beat ourselves up. You should know better. You shouldn't have done that. You should be, blah, blah, blah. And you end up shooting all over ourselves, right?
Right.
But understanding that should is the most dangerous word in the English dictionary. It's built on guilt and shame.
Yep.
Based on the fact that you didn't know or didn't have that skill set at that time, and all you're doing is giving yourself a hard time for not knowing. But what you're actually doing is you're compounding with your ego, and your ego says, well, obviously you're not ready to drive the car because you're still beating yourself up like this. So it's like your ego tricks you into these situations so that then you beat yourself up so it can justify to you why you can't drive the car yet.
Right.
So the thing is, and this is going round and round and round in circles. It's like, how many times have you given yourself a hard time for procrastinating or self-sabotaging or it doesn't help, does it? It just makes you feel bad. And then you go, oh, there, it's okay, you've got this, and just have another, have another drink or go and do this or whatever, and whatever it is, it's almost like we trick ourselves back into a thing to make ourselves feel better, which is actually the thing that we didn't want to do in the first place.
Right.
But once we start to see that, it's like, hold on a minute, my ego is doing this because it loves me.
Right.
It just doesn't know that I've grown up, and it's trying to run my life on a standard operating procedure that was written by a 3-year-old, which is not good business sense, right? It doesn't matter which business you go into, like that's not good business sense, right? But the moment you can realize that, it's like your ego is like a bit of a dumb friend at a party trying to keep you safe, but kind of making the party unenjoyable.
Right.
And rather than screaming at yourself in the mirror because you had a drink when you said you weren't going to do, or you missed the gym session when you said you were going to go, whatever it is, the first thing you actually say to it is thank you. But for most people, that's like a massive oxymoron. This is a serious kind of pattern interrupts, because the moment you see yourself and you catch yourself, oh, I've just done that thing that I said I wasn't going to do. It's all right, you got this. Thanks very much for trying to keep the important things important. Thanks very much for trying to look after me. Let's have a different conversation. And then we can start creating and formulating a different set of actions, which I do in the hypnosis at the theta level of consciousness, of brain frequency. So we can do it at a programming level. We start to rewrite the habits and behaviors. So actually what you were doing before isn't an option. The healthier option is, it's like, okay, I know when I feel like this, I'm going to do this instead. Oh, okay, cool. So you stop beating yourself up, rewrite the plan, and go in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's actually why I think I started getting into, I love Reiki, but I actually started getting into Theta Reiki, doing like the Theta, like, I guess in a way, it's kind of like hypnosis in a way, I guess. I mean, you are in a Theta state, so it's just not called hypnosis. I guess it's all that level of, state. But I noticed that that's what I started doing with my first mentor about 5-6 years ago. That when she started to notice that I was like, I don't want my ego. And she's like, no, we just need to be friends with your ego. And still now, sometimes it's like when I know those old stories come back up, or like it's an old little version of myself that comes back up, it's like I have control of, like, we're not doing that. Like, that's not real. Like, this is now, I'm 36 years old. You're 5 or whatever, like situation, whatever came up at the time. So it's like, it reminds me of, like, I feel like people listening to this, I feel like that's the biggest thing that they probably are struggling with, especially when it comes to like self-sabotage or procrastination. I don't think people realize they're all like emotional things. Like it's something emotional that happened when you were 5. And instead of figuring out why that's happening, you put that story on a shelf, figure out why the ego is trying to hide it per se, and then get to the deeper root of that emotion and then bring that story back in. And it's crazy when I started doing this. Like it's just wild to me that when somebody said a certain situation that I'm talking triggered me like no end, brought it back in and was like, asked me the same thing. And I was like, oh, I don't care. It's just like, wait a second, what? what happened? You don't care, and it's like, and it's so because it's not emotionally charged anymore. So
Correct.
that's all that there is. So yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree with what you're saying. It's
Yeah.
amazing once you realize that, and once you kind of can do that in every situation, if it's business, if it's, a relationship, if it's whatever, if money triggers you, figure out why it triggers you, and
Yeah.
then bring it back in and see if it still triggers you. And then like I feel like that's the missing piece that to manifestation that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about because they're so attached to the outcome, you
Correct.
know?
But they're attached to it from a conscious point of view.
Right.
They might be kind of saying to it, or, oh, I'm going to manifest this. I'm going to get a yacht. I'm going to get a house in Malibu. I'm going to do da 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 da. But if you can have whatever you like up here, if you're lucky, this is running about 12 to 18% of the show, like your conscious awareness. If
Yeah.
you're lucky, the rest of it's subconscious. So if you have a subconscious pattern that is contra to what you're actually kind of going out there and doing,
Right.
that is what's going to kind of rule the day.
Right.
So it's kind of really understand. I think Joe Dispenza said that something they did tests on it, and approximately 98% of your day is exactly the same as yesterday.
Yeah.
So if you want to kind of look at, okay, I want to live a different life, I want to get into kind of manifestation. Actually, you need to really understand what the law of resonance, and understand what you are resonating at frequency wise, emotionally wise, because that's what you're going to attract more of. It's not the law of attraction. The law of attraction isn't going to work. It's like the law of resonance is what makes it happen. So the law of resonance, which is really important for people to understand in this, when we're working in the frequency of mind, if you go into a music shop and you get a tuning fork and it's B sharp, and you hit a B sharp, all the other tuning forks that are B sharp will start to resonate with the tuning fork that you're holding.
Right.
Now, this is the same with our mind. If we walk into the restaurant of the universe and our mind is, vibrating at a level of scarcity and poverty and self-loathing and whatever, we're going to get a lot more of that kind of resonating in the restaurant of the universe. So it's like, okay, how do we shift that? Okay, well, let's go back to the original stories. Where did that story come from about money? Where did that story come from about health and well-being? Where did that story come from about relationship dynamics, about addiction, about substance abuse, whatever that substance is, and kind of whatever that might be, and starting to unpack that. What's the originating event? Because when you start to understand the originating event, even understanding at a conscious level, because you can ask a couple of questions. One is, when I'm being triggered by this thing, how old do I feel? And sometimes you'll just get an instant, 7 years old. What happened when you were 7? This happened. Okay, cool. That's the reason you do this. And sometimes for some people, that's enough. Like when you practice doing this, for a reason, that's enough to go, hold on a minute. Actually, I'm 47. I'm not 7. I don't need to keep asking for that anymore. Thanks. This is brilliant. And then sometimes it's like we need that. Okay, what's the habit and behavior? Okay, let's just change. What belief are we holding on to about ourselves as a result of that situation? What did we make the world mean according to that situation? Okay, what is it we need to let go of? And more importantly, what do we need to replace it with? Because now I can step into the world with a level of self-belief, or a level of self-esteem, or a level of confidence, because I've now put down my lack of belief, my not good enough. I've put that down, and actually I'm feeling good enough. So when we start to kind of explore this, we can start working in the subconscious mind and making that more conscious. So all the things that have been filed away and hidden, like all these negative belief structures that have been put in there and filed away, and that's just how we live our life, and we don't need to know about them as long as we don't have to think about it, because that's what the brain. This is another interesting fact. The brain doesn't want you to think.
Right.
Right?
I've heard I heard that before and I was like, wait a second. What?
Yeah. But this
Yeah.
is, and this, biologically, your brain uses 20% of the calories that you put into your body. Go figure.
Yeah.
20% of the calories your body uses is done on your brain. 2.5 pounds of fatty tissue, right?
Right.
20% of the calories. So the last thing your brain wants you to do is think, because the more you think, the more energy you use. The more like if you start rewiring your brain and changing neural pathways and pruning synapses and doing all these things, you're going to start using too many calories. And it doesn't want you to do that, because he wants you to get ready for winter, because he wants you to store calories for winter so that you can hibernate and survive. It doesn't know that there's a quickie mart on the corner or whatever, 7-Eleven. Doesn't know you've got all those
Right.
things.
Grocery store. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't know these things.
Yeah.
So it doesn't want you to think. So it creates all these habits and behaviors in order for you to maintain connection, to reduce your calorie usage, even if those existing habits and behaviors are actually slowly killing you. It doesn't care, because that's what it sees as safe. That's how you get safe and certain. And that's what causes the problem. Is like, it creates the habit because it loves you, doesn't want you to feel bad. But these habits and behaviors, in order to maintain connection, to be a good little girl, a good little boy, to still get loving connection from your parents and those people, more often than not will result in habits and behaviors which will slowly destroy you from the inside out.
Yeah. I was just sitting here thinking, I heard that a while ago about your brain uses, or your brain doesn't want you to think because of using the calories. And I'm thinking, usually when I'm either overthinking or I'm like working really hard, I feel like I always have to have a snack or eat. And like when you just said that, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. My brain's working too
100%.
hard. And it's like, now you need to go eat. I really don't need
100%.
to go eat. It's just because that's just kind of like we're gonna starve, but it's really not. We have extra fat on
Yeah.
us that you can use.
So here's the important bit with that, though, is like, depending on the food that you then go through, and I'm not a nutritionist, most of us know this, it's like we're fueling our body.
Right,
If you put crappy soda in and crappy sugar, high fructose glucose syrups or whatever into your system, your
right,
body's going to go into toxic shock. And it's like being on heroin or cocaine. Your brain's going to go in overdrive, your liver's going to go into crisis, all of these things. But your
right,
body then starts to have to process the sugar, so it can't actually process the thoughts.
right. Yeah.
Because what happens is you're starting to kind of do the rewiring. It's trying to go for that fast fix potentially, but it's
Mhm.
going for the healthiest option to actually fuel it. Now, when the body goes into a toxic load, a toxic shock like that, it doesn't matter whether it's cocaine, sugar, alcohol, eating too much, salt, whatever it is, salty foods, like overdoing these things, your body can't process physical pain and emotional pain at the same time.
Right.
So what we're doing is we're actually self-harming. We
Right.
put ourselves into a state of physical anguish, whether toxic load, food, whatever it is, drugs, and our body has to process that before it can deal with it. So it's using the chemical or the external factors in order to shut you down psychologically, so that you don't have to deal with the emotions. So it's doing its best to keep you away
Mm,
from the original emotional hurt from when you were 3, 4, 5 years old. So it would rather you eat crap food than deal with that emotional content. So it constantly keeps you in this dynamic. If you've got any spare space, or you're thinking too hard, or you're getting close to something, have a sugary snack. That will really help you. Body shuts down, finds it more difficult to process.
yeah. And I actually I like that you just said that because I was on a podcast, I think it was a couple weeks ago, about addiction. And she came to me and she had reached out to me. She said, I want you to speak about, spirituality and addiction. And I was like, and she was in recovery. My husband's also in recovery. So I always tread lightly when I speak about that, because it can get very triggering. She was like, no, 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 no. I feel like coming from a space of spirituality, it needs like any 12-step program, if it's AA, if it's NA, whatever it is, needs more spirituality. And I was like, oh, yeah. And that doesn't mean like that could be religion, that could be whatever people, it's like whatever people want to believe. Right.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, I mean, and even my husband was like, why wouldn't you want to speak on something like that? I was like, I don't know, maybe it's just because, and then he was like, then I stopped. I was like, just cause. And he was like, oh, it's a story you're telling yourself. And I said, yeah, I think it was probably when I was, just starting, and somebody was like, you can't speak on addiction. You've never went through it. In a different sense, I have, right? Like, I've watched it, I've been part of it. Like, I've been multiple relationships of like drug addicts and, all that stuff. So from a different perspective, I know how it affects the body, and I was, in a sense, addicted to relationships. It wasn't drugs, but it was actual people. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like that's a little bit, can be a little bit harder because you have to have people around you. You don't necessarily always have to have drugs. So anyway, so when I spoke on that, when I said this to her, about, what the brain does, and, like how it's, when I asked the question on, like, I think my mom said, why do you choose this? Or somebody said, she said, oh yeah, my mom asked me why I do drugs or whatever. And I said, do people think that you guys wake up every day, or wake up one day and be like, 10 years old, I'm just going to go do drugs? Like, no, it's because probably from you were born, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you have all this trauma that now you have to work through and nobody's helping you. So now you're going to get something to numb it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that when people say, two things, when people say, I'm like, you're so delusional. When they're like, oh, it just runs in the family. I'm like, but what if they actually have had experiences as a kid? I mean, sure, it runs in the family. You repeat the same cycles as your parents or your family or whatever. Sure, that's one thing. But like, what if you have trauma and you're suppressing it? Like, I asked I've even talked to my husband's parents about it, and it's like, oh yeah, it runs in the family. That's why he did it. And he's like, I really wish they would stop telling people that, because I did it because I wanted to suppress everything that he went through when he was a kid. And I'm like, exactly. And then the other thing too, when you said this, the second part to it about the emotional piece is, now when you're in recovery, you're like, now what do I do with this emotions? Like, these emotions are so strong, and you don't have something to suppress it. You don't have that drug. You have to feel it and
Yeah.
then release it. And that's not easy. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
it's not easy at all. Like, sometimes even now, like, maybe I'm using doom scrolling, or I'm disassociating. That's my trauma response, I know, to different things when I don't want to feel it. But I've noticed the quicker I just feel it and release it, it's just like, I have to remind myself, let's just feel this, let's just sit in this. It's uncomfortable for a little bit and then like move on. But it's like, I sometimes get myself into this, I don't want to feel shame anymore, I don't want to feel guilt. And it's like, that shame sometimes can feel so ungodly uncomfortable. Even now, I mean, I've been doing this work for like 7 or 8 years, it still feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all about peeling layers. And
Yeah.
it's not, it's everybody's addicted. I don't know anyone that isn't addicted.
Right.
Like 100%.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're overworking, and we're working 13-hour days. And what are we doing it for? Some of us are doing it to prove a point. Some of us are, because that's what gives us peace and quiet. Some of us are out there addicted to CrossFit. There are
Right.
plenty of people out there doing CrossFit that are psychologically needing some support, where they're out there absolutely destroying their bodies. And there are other ones,
Right.
doing, there's a cross section of people. Some people are addicted to extreme independence.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are addicted to coffee, to food, to whatever. Is we create emotional connections to certain things. Now, the interesting thing for me with addiction, from what I've heard and kind of read, is we're not actually addicted to the substance. What we're actually addicted to is the peace and quiet.
Mm.
That moment when we do the line of cocaine, that moment when the ecstasy kicks in, that moment when we're in the high of self-gratification because of pornography, whatever it is, in those
Right.
moments, as we
Yeah.
have those. And we're bombarded all the time by these different messages, by different ways to alleviate the stress of it and to not be this and to be distracted. It's so easy to get caught up in those things. Like, we
Yeah.
have been hijacked by marketing and media and all of these things for centuries. So
Yeah.
when we start to see that, And we start to peel the labels. Look, I'm still working through some of my stuff. I've worked through lots of them, but there's still things that come up when I'm getting close to kind of finishing a big project. That little voice in my head, the inner critic, likes to chip in a little bit, and it's just like, okay, cool. How do we work through that? How do I work with myself? How do I clear through this? How do I get the next step of clarity? How do I put down the habit and behavior that's holding me back and actually get on with being who I need to be? This is what we're giving people the opportunity to do. So the moment that we can start giving ourselves a bit of an easier time, is like, it's not that we're not addicted, it's that we've all got stuff going on. It's not that, no, it's not that your childhood was perfect. And I know lots of people say, yeah, my childhood was great. Let's talk about that. Because then you find out that their parents are divorced or something happened. They're like, yeah, but my parents loved me. They may have loved you, and they still love you, and you still love them. But in that moment, there was a separation, there was a severance in the family where there was a rift that was created. And in that moment, there was a little pin put in the map of the map of your life to say something happened here.
Yeah.
And it's about helping people to reconnect those dots and to release themselves from that emotional baggage. And the key thing with the hypnotherapy is what we're doing is we're enabling people to show up as the parent they wish they had in that moment. They get to have a conversation with themselves in a way that they've been waiting for somebody else to do for them. So they can stop waiting for their dad to come home. So they can stop waiting for a grandparent who's passed on to walk back, come home for Christmas. So they can have that, have the mum they wish they expected to get as a child but never got. All of these things, and there's multiple variants of these stories. But when you can stop waiting for those things that are never going to happen, when you can stop expecting, stop hanging on for something to be different and other than it was, your life gets easier, because those things aren't taking up space in your head rent free, which is stopping you from showing up in the way that you can show up as. Right. This is where we can make the difference.
Yeah, I used to always tell myself for the longest time that, when I became a mom, some of that mom guilt, and I was like, I don't know how, I was on a call yesterday with my group, and somebody had said, I had asked a question. I think my mentor had asked a question, and then I was getting ready to answer, and it was like, it's kind of like the most qualified position as a parent, that they just send you home with a baby, and you're like, what'd you just do? You sent me home with a baby. I don't know how to be a parent, right? So it's like, I always promised myself and my daughter that I would be the best. I would be the parent that I always wanted, in hopes that would break that generational curse of me trying to figure out, not being emotionally available, or, the abuse or the trauma dumping and all that stuff. So it's like, I wanted to shift that pattern, because I feel like if I didn't shift that pattern, I even seen tangible proof of, when I would speak sometimes, I'm like, oh my God, I sound like my mom, so I'm like, oh no, this is not happening. And I think what in the beginning, I really failed at this, which is okay. But I tried so hard to not be my mom that I became her.
Yes.
So then I was like, let me just not try so hard. And it's just was so easy. I just intuitively just kind of, worked through all of that, and realized that my parents are amazing people. I love them. They love me. But at the same time, there was a lot of things that I didn't feel safe, again, like you said, safe to tell them.
Yep.
And specifically things that happened with sexual abuse in my family in the past. And my mom, I spoke about it in a book that I published. So it's like, I had to say something to them before they read it in a book. And my mom was like, why didn't you tell me? And I'm like, I didn't feel safe enough to tell you. And I didn't say it in a way that like I wanted to hurt her feelings, but she gets it. She's like, oh my gosh, I get it, because when she was a kid, something very similar happened, and she never told her parents. I think to this day, her parents, I mean, besides they're in spirit, they know, but they didn't know what happened. And she carried that around. And I was like, Mom, but you carrying that around, pass that on to me, which then happened to me. And I said, that's something for me, I'm not willing to do for my daughter. So it's like, or do to my daughter. Like, I just think it's time that I'll feel it, as long as, and heal it, and then move on. And I feel like that is with anybody, like anybody. It doesn't matter like who you are. When people tell me, oh yeah, I've had a great life, I don't have any trauma, I'm like, are you human? What?
Yeah,
You're a
100%.
dangerous person. Get away from me.
Yeah, 100%. Because
Yeah,
like everyone's carrying something. We're all carrying one thing or another. It's like, where did we get that disconnect? We're not living in society in the way that we were designed to live as human beings.
yeah,
We were designed to live in units of 150 people, and everybody knew everybody. And when you had a child, the whole family, the whole tribe would come together to raise that child.
yeah.
And and we don't live like that. We live complete isolation and separation psychologically and physiologically. So when it comes to parenting, there's a couple of things that happen. One is either we do unto others as was done unto us.
Right,
So when it comes to being raised as a child and raising children, we'll do to our children what was done to us to validate what was done to us in
right.
some cases, not always, but
Yeah,
in order to say, look at me, mum, dad, I'm a good little boy. I'm doing to my children what you did to me. Therefore, what you did to me must be okay because I'm doing it to them.
right,
This is one route, okay, and the varying scales of stuff that goes with that. And then you have the other people, which they tend to flip flop. So you might be the grandparents were raging alcoholics, the children were staunch born again Christians, didn't touch a drop, and then the children are binge drinking every weekend. So we start to see kind of it's starting to kind of ping pong from one side to the other. But
right.
we're not actually it's taking lots of generations for us to resolve it. We've gone from raging alcoholics to binge drinkers, and generationally it's unfolding. But that dynamic is still in there. So
Right.
when we get to a moment where someone says, you know what, actually I've had an experience, I now have the capacity, the wherewithal, the capability, the environment, the support, the peer group, etc., all those things, and I'm going to deal with this, so that actually my children don't have to do the same thing again.
Right.
You then become the point where you become the line, we become the people that said no more and linked arms and said that we're not going to repeat this and we're going to do something different.
Yeah.
So it's important we can do that, but then we're changing the dynamic of the conversations with our children. We're changing the way that they interact with us, because we couldn't do it with our parents. We couldn't be honest with them because it was, for fear of that kind of generational shame.
Yeah.
I'm 47. I was born in 1978. To talk to my parents about that sort of thing, that would have been shameful and embarrassing because they didn't know how to talk to us about it.
Right.
So, but now we're doing things a bit differently, and the dynamic is changing. Something I wanted to come back to when you're talking about addicts being born addicts, they did this test on mice. It was an amazing experiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
What they did is they were looking at the propensity of children getting heart disease and diabetes after World War II in Amsterdam. So the people experienced famine in Holland because of the Nazi. I can't remember the right word. Like the Nazis being present there. So they did this test on mice and they kind of explored it, and they associated the smell of cherry bakewells, right? Cherry essence with being electrocuted. So they'd electrocute the mouse high enough to really hurt, but low enough not to kill it, and associate it with the smell of cherry bakewells. And then what they thought, and this was all done through the male line. So this was done through the sperm, not even through the egg, right? So they expected that X% of the children, the pups of the mouse, would then respond in the same way to this.
Hmm.
So and they did the test, but what they didn't expect to happen was it actually, and this was the first experiment to do it, showed that the grandchildren through the male line also responded to the same stimuli. X% responded just to the smell of cherry bakewells. Y if they saw another mouse being electrocuted and smelt them, and Z also increased it if they had smell and had the electrocution as well. That this kind of evolutionary switch went on, and they would then start to freak out at the smell of cherry bakewells. So,
Yeah.
so we've got this kind of epigenetic process going on where things that have happened to our grandparents, great grandparents in, whatever, in Vietnam, in Korea, in World War II, World War I, the Boer War, all these people that haven't dealt with their PTSD and had these horrendous experiences in these war zones. None of that stuff got dealt with at a psychological level. It's just been passed on genetically.
Yeah.
So we do now have a higher propensity to anxiety and depression and OCD and these things, like more than we've ever had. PTSD through the roof.
Yeah.
But these kind of evolutionary switches are being engaged with what's happened, decades before. But at the same time, can we rewire that stuff? Yes. If we can wire it one way, we can wire it the other.
Right.
So
Yeah.
when we're looking at these things, these situations, and like how we're being parented, experiences we've had as kids, how we're raising, like how our kids are triggering us. This is a great one, by the way. Like if you've got, how many kids you got, Lauren?
I just have one daughter. She's 5.
Cool. Cool. I've got one daughter, she's 12 and a half, right? But
Yeah.
your kids are designed to trigger the absolute shit out of you,
Yeah.
right? That's what kids are there for.
Yeah.
It's not the only reason, but in the majority, that's what they're there for as a parent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So when we see this, what I say to people is what triggers you externally is what needs to be worked on internally.
Right.
And the age of the child that triggers you most is normally the age that you need to go back to do the biggest piece of work.
Yeah.
So if your daughter's 5 and she's triggering you, it's in a case of actually, Lauren, what happened to you when you were 5?
Yeah. She started triggering me, I think, at maybe 3, maybe 4, but I remember going through my own journey. I feel like I remember now that I've done so much like deep, deep, deep work. I remember when my mom was pregnant. I remember being in my mom's belly. I remember bits and pieces from pictures of like memories of like when she delivered. Had a very traumatic delivery. Um, and I remember when I was like 1 and 2 years old, but my trauma had started when I was like 4. So
Gotcha.
four, 5, maybe. So I feel like that's when she triggers me. Same thing with my husband, because my husband basically is not her dad, but had helped me take care of her since she was like 1 and a half. So he's been around half her life, you know. So she looks at him as a father figure. Her biological dad is still around, but you know, he's just, you know, he just sees her like twice, 2 weekends a month, or you know, whatever. He's not really present, you know. So, but that's still her dad, and I noticed that they have some type of connection, but he gets triggered, and I'm like, you have to. I had said to him a couple months ago, like, you do know that Lily's reason why one of the many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is to help you with your own triggers. So that just started happening when she was like 5. She'll be 6 in December, but so he started talking about like being more open to talk about it. Because he you know, he's not used to talking about his feelings. So when it's just uncomfortable for him, which is okay.
Yeah.
Like whenever he's ready to talk about it, I don't push him. I don't his path is his path whenever he's ready, you know. I feel like his whole life he's had to been in survival mode. So um you know, it will take him maybe longer, which is fine. You know, that's his journey. And he had said to me maybe a couple months ago, maybe, I don't know, maybe 3, 4 months ago, he said that his trauma did start when he was 5. And he said the most triggering part is when she doesn't listen, because I always had to listen. That was the story. And I was like, and that's true. And you get yelled at, and you get punished, and you get things taken away. And I actually just had a conversation with this mom last night, and she was just randomly telling me about just different stuff. And she was like, I never knew that when they were kids, you know, the newspapers were a big thing. Well, they were like a newspaper family. So they would go out and deliver newspapers. Well, his dad would get him and his other brother up at 4 o'clock in the morning when they had school. Now, this is like when they were 8 years old, make them deliver papers and then put them back in bed. So when the mom got up, she never knew they were gone. And this went on for a very long time. And she never knew what was happening. And she just understood. She just was like, why are you guys so angry all the time? And he, you know, then I think when they got older, they had said, because dad always gets us up and we have to deliver newspapers before school. And she's like, what are you talking about? So at that time, that anger comes up, and that's usually the story that happens. Or if you wake him up in the morning when he doesn't, you know, like he gets up at 3:30 in the morning anyway to go to work. But like if it's his day off and you wake him up, oh my God, that anger comes up. But I understand that because he shared that with me. So it's like I have a little bit more compassion of like, that's a him thing. He's working through that. It has nothing to do with me. But before that, I'm like, am I a terrible person? Am I like, you know, it was so much more like I didn't understand. And I feel like I'm saying this because I feel like people that might be going through the same thing, or if, you know, their husbands, boyfriends, whoever, don't talk about, or maybe if it's their wives or they had deep trauma and they don't talk about it, I feel like that connection piece in like a relationship is huge. I mean, for me, I never talked about my feelings and how I felt or whatever. It was uncomfortable. So it's like when he makes me talk about it sometimes, or not makes me, but like he'll ask about it, or I'm like, this is not, I have to remind myself, this is not an old relationship. This is not my father. This is not a family member. I'm safe. It's sometimes it's like, is this real? Like I have to pinch myself sometimes. Like, is this real? Like just having deja vu or something like that. That like I have to still remind myself to this day that like I'm not in a toxic relationship. Even though sometimes I'm like, like it's is this healthy? But it is, because it's like things don't happen. Like it's like my body's not constantly going up and down, up and down, up and down. So that kind of feels boring to me. But it's just because that's my body's used to that, and maybe that's what I used to chase. So yeah.
100%. And in that, there's this one of my favorite quotes. It's an Adams Family quote. And people's like, Adams Family. It's like, yeah, Morticia Adams said, she said, normal was an illusion.
Yeah.
What's normal to the spider is chaos to the fly. And we'll go looking for what we know love to look like.
Yeah.
So we get given 40 maps of the world by people that don't know how to navigate. And then we get ourselves into situations and beat ourselves up for getting lost. So that when we start to see that, it's just like, well, what actually have I been programmed to tolerate, to accept in my life, which actually isn't okay, which isn't isn't acceptable, and isn't okay for me psychologically, physiologically, for any part of my well-being.
Yeah.
What do I want to do differently? So when we start to look at that, do differently, it's like with your partner, it's like you can start to realize it's, hold on a minute, I'm getting angry here, but is it me getting angry? No, it's 3-year-old me, it's 8-year-old me, it's like whatever. It's like, oh, does 8-year-old, like, what's 8-year-old me got to say? Okay, cool. Then we can work through that rather than,
Right.
projecting that. There's another famous quote, which I love, is like, if we don't heal our wounds, we end up bleeding on people that didn't cut us.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it's about looking at those moments where we get triggered, where we get activated, where we switch on some emotion, but it's not adult us, it's 5-year-old us trying to speak through us. It's just like, what am I actually getting angry about? It's like, oh, this reminded me of that time when I used to get woken up when I was a kid and it looked like this and da 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 da. It's like,
Yeah.
has that got anything? And then we can say, has that got anything to do with my wife? No. Has that got anything to do with my kids? No.
Yeah.
Oh shit, how do I want to show up? It's like, well, actually, I want to show up as a really loving parent that doesn't wake their kids up at 4 in the morning. It's like, and then we can start rewriting reality based on this new perspective, rather than the little version of us trying to speak through the adult version of us and wondering why we keep screwing our relationships along the way.
Right. Yeah. It kind of goes to like blaming, like, oh, you did this, so I did that. And it's just like, no, no, no. That's a big one too. A couple of my clients are having like relationship issues. And I'm like, well, what I used to do is I used to say, well, you acted this way, so I acted this way. That's like what kids do. So like same thing. I'm like, when did that happen when you were a kid? It was like with her brother. It's like her brother was older. Her brother um was like always in and out of the hospital, had a I think mental illness and like something else. So that all the focus was on him. But mainly, because they had to figure out, like his health and stuff. So I said, it's more of like attention. And my husband sometimes does the same thing. Like I'll do something subconsciously, like, oh shit, I probably shouldn't have said that. Or like, oh, I apologize, I'll take it back or whatever. And then it triggers him to say something back or whatever. And it's like, he likes to argue. I don't like to argue. So like looking at it from a different perspective, I had asked his brother, I'm like, did Joey like to argue all the time? He's like, oh my God, yes. And if you didn't argue back, he got mad. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So it's like I just kind of like could sit back and like pull myself out of it. Before it was like constantly going back and forth, like fighting for my life sometimes. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like, it's like me trying to argue with my 5-year-old. I will not do it. I'm just going to ignore her because she just, again, all she wants me to do is argue with her. Like, or say something back. And it's like, mommy, you're not listening to me. Well, I'm not engaging in this. And she will just stop, literally just stop. And I'm like, maybe I could do this with, people that maybe are going through something, or maybe my husband. And it's like, I tell people this all the time, that if they don't have anything to argue with, who are they arguing with? Because they're not going to argue with themselves. They're just not, you know? So yeah, it's definitely definitely a good, it's a good thing to kind of keep in your back, in your mind, of like, who is this, versus, it's not my wife, it's not my boyfriend, my girlfriend, whatever. It's me. It's a past version of me. And I feel like for me, I always like to have like on my desk a picture of the little girl version, because she's not gone. She's just older. And
Yep.
she got me to where I am today. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be who I am today. But it's like, she's also not running the show. My 5-year-old self is not running the show.
Exactly that.
You're still there. I still love you, but I feel like I rejected her for so long that she was loud, getting louder and louder and louder, like a 5-year-old kid would. If you're ignoring them, they're going to be really loud. You're going to see them. You have to, you know?
And they will get louder. So the more you ignore them, the louder they will get, and the more those things will turn up. So we often see, it's like, alcoholics don't start drinking whiskey and vodka. They start on lager and they build up to it. People's serious drug addictions often start on marijuana. Marijuana isn't the gateway drug. It's the
Yeah.
trauma that actually encouraged them to do that. But the marijuana got them to a certain level, and now their brain was like able to process and kind of function on marijuana. So now they need a bit more. So they need to go something up a level. And we do it with our relationships as well. We'll get into even more and more extreme relationships with people in order to continually kind of push down and kind of negate the thinking, or the thinking space that stops us from going back to that original moment. So the really important part is looking at the illness, looking at the incident, looking at the behaviors, looking at the habits, whatever it is. And we're lucky if we get to that tipping point, that inflection point, where it's either we realize that it's either going to kill us or put us in prison. We're lucky if we get to that point.
Yeah.
Because then at that point, it's just like, okay, if I don't stop doing that, that's my two options right now.
Right.
When we can then step into that and go, hold on a minute, something needs to change here. What do I need to do differently? Okay, how do I get help? How do I get support? What do I need to stop doing? What needs to shift? What do I need to reconcile? Then at that point, we can then change those habits and behaviors. Because no matter what it is as much as sometimes we have those people in our lives that like to kind of stoke the fire and kind of prod us like every now and again, because that's what they know normal is. That's how they know they get attention, etc. Because that's what they were programmed as kids. If it meant, that actually that behavior was going to end a relationship, most people would stop doing that.
Right. Yeah.
Unless they were doing it in order to validate why that relationship was going to break down and say, actually, there you go, told you so. You aren't good enough to be in this relationship anyway because you keep prodding them.
Yeah. I feel like I was definitely, it took me a couple times, it took me a couple failed relationships after my divorce to realize, oh, this is the same relationship. Probably 3 different times. And it kind of goes to like, everything happens in my life in threes normally. So it was like at that moment that third relationship happened, that I was like, okay, I think that's kind of when another spiritual awakening happened, and I was in solitude, which is the first start to, you have to be in solitude first. Then it's like, the connection with community and all that stuff. And I feel like if I didn't put myself in that place, I wouldn't have been where I am. Same thing with my husband. He, had relapsed 3 times. But he did say, every single time I relapsed, I learned something different about myself, and the first time was for his parents. The second time was for his family. And then the third time he said it was for me, because people, and he said the one thing that he remembers, I think, going in, knowing he didn't want to get clean, I think, was that his counselor told him, or whoever, mentor or whatever, told him that relapse is part of the program. So he's like, oh, I got to experience that. I was like, of course you did,
Yep.
Ego was like, okay, let's do it. We don't, because but he was there against his own will. He didn't want to be there. So it's like, the second time he kind of wanted to be there, but had a lot of shame around it. And the third time he succeeded. And now looking back, it's been 5 or 6 years, I think. And now looking at him when he speaks about it sometimes, like about, it's like, I forget he's like an entirely different person. I forget that that was his past, you know? He jokes about it and I'll like joke back and I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, you know, like it's just it's just a different thing. Like, it's like kind of like a story. He put it up on the shelf and then he did what he needed to do. And then there's no connection to it. Like, he is in recovery, yes, but he doesn't identify, as he said, as his words, as an addict because he feels like that still connects into that and he's learned that lesson from there. You know what I mean? And I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of people say that, you know, which is why he doesn't go to AA meetings, he doesn't go to NA meetings. He'll reach out to therapists, he'll reach out to get help or whatever if he needs help. He does a lot of metaphysical stuff, you know, healing and all that stuff. But
Yep.
you know, like I said, he's addicted, you know, like everybody's addicted. And he's addicted to the gym. He mentally has to go to the gym. That just helps him, you know? So you're right. We always just replace that habit, that, you know, like whatever, with something else healthy. Going to the gym is not going to kill you. I mean, as long as you're not disregarding everything else. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you're saying that, once upon a time, there were things that we had to do, and if we didn't do them, we'd die. Like, you had to spend your summer, you know, chopping wood for the winter. You had to spend time putting food in jars and stuff to survive the winter. You know, the snow's coming. You had to cure meat. You had to do these things. So your year was spent harvesting and drying and collecting and storing, and that's
right,
what you did. And if you did not do those things, you died.
right,
You didn't have a choice.
right,
So, you know, if you wanted to die, fine, you wouldn't do those things, and then you've got a problem. But, you know, if you're in a community, the community worked together and they probably wouldn't let you anyway. But that was the way it is.
right,
But whereas now, whereas we don't have that drive and that determination, the whole thing, you know, is like warm yourself twice, you know, chop wood before you burn it, you know, chop wood, carry water. These, especially for men, this is a dynamic we need to be kind of getting back into, that physicality, but the physicality of something productive and necessary and of purpose. But
right,
99% of what we're actually doing for a job out there actually doesn't have a purpose. Like,
right,
there's very little out there, and we can kind of dress it up to how we want to do it. And we don't have to think about where our food comes from. We don't have to think about how much exercise we got. We've got the gym. We don't have to chop wood to heat our houses. We don't have to keep the wolves from the door. We don't have to do any of that.
right,
So then we have all this spare time to think about and kind of process all the other stuff. It's like, well, what can we keep you busy with? And as the Romans said with the gladiatorial thing, give them bread and games, and people will be happy. And this is what we've got. You know, so
right,
everyone's out there kind of eating their own body weight in pastries and watching the Super Bowl. And it's just like, you
right.
know, so this is what we're doing to keep ourselves kind of sedated. But the moment we start thinking about that, it's like, actually, what can we do? For men, chop wood, carry water, and life gets a lot easier and a lot simpler.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed um, today's conversation. I feel like it was everything that I needed, and I think everything that listeners needed as well. So, is there one last nugget of wisdom that you wanted to share with our listeners before we wrap up?
You know what? I think I've ticked a lot of the boxes in this conversation, but for me, it's coming back to what triggers you externally is what needs to be worked on internally. And that thing that's triggering you externally has got nothing to do with anybody else and everything to do with you. And the moment you can see that and you can start holding yourself in the way that you wish someone had held you in that moment that it reminds you of, your world will become a way more beautiful place.
I love, love, love that. Well, thank you for joining us on today's episode with Nathan on the Enlightened Misfits podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and make sure you share this with somebody that you feel that would gain knowledge from listening. I'll make sure all of his links, if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description box, or if you're listening to this on any of your um, audio podcast platforms, you'll see his link below in the description box. Stay tuned for more captivating conversations in the future. Hope you have an amazing rest of your week, and I will see you next week.